Okay, so let's start here. Quick show of hands if you've ever had lead generation in your LinkedIn headline or bio. Okay, lead generation. Okay, another show of hands if you've had demand generation in your headline or your bio. More, okay, now my favorite one. Raise your hand if you've ever had both lead gen and demand gen in your job description or your LinkedIn somehow. Okay, a few. Well, you all are not as confused as I've been, so I guess that's a good sign. Let's see where we get to with this then. Today I'm going to tell you a little story over the last year about JupyterOne and our transition from primarily a lead generation strategy to a demand gen one. Who am I? I'm Sarah. I have been in B2B SaaS marketing since 2012 and repeatedly been at startups, which should tell you about the type of person I am. Currently, I'm the head of demand generation and digital marketing at JupyterOne. And something that I believe is really important is to disclose bias up front. So I'm going to do a little bit of that right now so you can interpret where I'm coming from for the next 40 minutes or so. I started my career at the height of performance marketing, SEO, inbound marketing, all of those styles of doing lead gen. And I started as an AdWords and SEO copywriter. So I was working at an agency churning out lots and lots of Google AdWords copy, dozens of blog posts a week, literally. And basically one day woke up and wanted to understand how does me being a copy monkey turn into revenue for our customers. And that began my journey from just churning out a lot of copy to actually doing lead gen and eventually now demand gen. And I think that's really where we need to start because definitions are everything. And depending on who you ask, people are going to define these terms differently. That's not important for today. What's important is how I define them. So we can get a beer later and you can argue with me. That's super fun. But for the sake of today, when I say lead generation, I mean maximizing email addresses. It's the strategy we're all familiar with. Entice people to give you their email address, with your great ebook and your webinar. Then once they give you their email address, email them a bunch of content, track every single click they do, and send those people to your SDR team so that they just relentlessly call and email those folks until maybe eventually they agree to a meeting. Raise your hand if you've run this playbook before. Yeah, this was the playbook, basically from the beginning of my marketing career. Versus demand generation, which, this is a casual definition, but what I mean by that is instead of maximizing, we're focused on maximizing sales number of at-bats, the number of actual conversations that they're having with prospects. So I think there are two main ways to do this. The first is focusing on distributing your content, brand recognition, a lot of the things that Tom talked about yesterday, until people come to you asking to hear about your product, number one. And number two, equipping your sales team with really good data so that they can prioritize and effectively manage the outbound that they're doing. So today we're going to do a story time of what this transition has been like at JupyterOne. It's actually pretty great that this is happening in the middle of December because it gives me almost a tight 12-month timeline to talk to you guys about today. And we're going to go through why we changed strategies, what exactly we changed tactically. We're going to get into some really practical stuff here, how long it took or is taking, and where we are now. So for those of you that were in Tom Wentworth's session, the keynote yesterday, he gave us a really great idea of demand generation at a 300 million ARR company. Think of this session as the version of that for companies under 20 million ARR. So we're going to get into some nitty-gritty here. But first, the results. Where did we end up by where we are now, the middle of December? MQL's in the toilet. And this was very much intentional, okay? We're gonna get into this in great detail. But on the flip side, demo requests up and to the right. We love to see it, right? A couple of things I want to point out about this lovely graph here. Another change that maybe sounds small, but actually I think is a really big deal is I filter out disqualified demo requests from every single report I send outside of marketing. It's good for us to know how many of our form fills are junk, but when I report to the sales team or the leadership team at Jupiter One or in our business review meetings across several functions, we only care about the ones that are actually qualified. So in another org, these may be called sales accepted leads, but they're people at the right companies, the right individuals who have asked to talk to us, and that is the North Star metric now. So let's rewind. Think back to January. We were all so bright, shiny, and innocent. Our leadership team started off with a project many of you are probably familiar with, which is creating a lead to revenue model. So whatever you're thinking in your head that this was, you're probably exactly right. This was looking at all of the funnel and pipeline data basically from the beginning of Jupiter One's history through to December of last year to understand conversion rates between stages and, of course, plan for the next year. How many leads were we going to need in the top of the funnel to get to our pipeline and revenue goals? Simple, right? Now, I know everybody loves good benchmark data. Don't take this as a benchmark, but this is essentially where we netted out through this exercise. We could argue whether this is good or bad. The truth is, it had been really effective. In previous years, it had gotten Jupiter One to where we needed to be. And most importantly, this strategy had built a database from non-existent to being pretty healthy in terms of covering our ICP target accounts and just generally the who's who in our total addressable market. But the problem with it was this overall conversion rate. And you know, from what I've seen, this is not particularly good, particularly bad. It's just what you're going to get from lead generation these days. What we found, though, is taking this model and trying to push it forward into the new year to then predict what we would need to deliver with the same budget, same resources, was that we were going to need so many more leads this year to make this work. It simply would not have worked. So we needed to do something different. About this time, we had a bunch of leadership changes in the marketing team, including a new VP of Marketing, Rebecca Sanda. I was promoted into the role I'm in now, the Director of Demand Generation. And just overall, there was an appetite for change, partially through some of these leadership changes, but also largely spun off from this exercise. So where did that leave us? By the first week of March, we were rolling out a new strategy. Something that Rebecca was really, really effective at doing with our team was getting all of the different marketing functions from product marketing, demand gen, events, PR, comms, social media, to develop our own plans, but then bring them together on a format where we could talk to non-marketers and help them understand what we were doing and why. Flash warning, this is what it looks like, okay? This was 98 slides. Don't worry, we never presented 98 slides in a single meeting. Calm down. But it did become the walking deck through the rest of the year, where if somebody had a question, we probably had a glossy slide to talk about it. But the demand gen section basically boiled down to this one slide. Dividing demand generation into these three buckets of capturing demand, damming demand, and generating new demand is not something I came up with. I did find, however, that this way of describing it was really effective when talking to leaders and explaining that there were a few things I could, spoiler. There were a few things I could do that would be quick wins, but for the most part, things were going to take 12 plus months. No leader wants to hear that. So we sandwiched them together to have short-term and longer-term wins. In the demand generation bucket, a lot of these things are things that Tom talked about or that you've heard in last year's conference and in sessions this week. Things like educational campaigns, a heavy emphasis on content marketing, even zero-click ad campaigns, which we'll talk about later, whereas demand capture is conversion rate optimization. It's capturing the demand that's already in the market, getting really effective at that. Demand damming is just a fancy word for doing competitor campaigns. Non-marketers love competitor campaigns. So first piece of advice. This is not free. It's 5 cents. I'll send around a hat or something. Do your homework. And what I mean by that is, back to the 98 slides, the purpose of this is instilling confidence in the rest of the org that you've thought it through. it's not about having a perfect answer for everything. It's about explaining the assumptions you've made. And perception is reality. So if there's the perception that marketing has thought this through and they have good reason for changing tactics, then that will be the way that other teams interpret what you're doing. And so coming up with a really detailed long plan may sound like, well, duh, we come up with a plan every year. But especially in the context of change management and doing something different was even more important. I can tell you we're well into the process of planning for next year, and our presentation is not 98 slides, it's like 40, okay? But that's because we had done the alignment homework last year in a period of some really intense strategic change across all of go-to-market. So by March, we'd rolled this out. The first thing that we did was actually not change the model really at all. It would have been really hard to go to our sales leaders and say, now you're going to do a completely different workflow, and I'm never sending you any more leads, and also, by the way, I want you to do ABM. It wouldn't have worked. So where we started was with this. Same funnel model, same ops in HubSpot that were going to hand leads over to sales, but we changed the definition of marketing qualified lead to make it drastically higher bar. I more or less equated them to demo requests, but there are a couple of exceptions. So documented conversations at an event booth would be part of the new marketing qualified lead. So not, here's my badge, can I have a t-shirt? We have an MQL, but oh, somebody stopped and talked to us for a while. We understand their pain point, what they're looking for. Also engaged contacts at 6 QA accounts. We'll also get into that a bit later. And this leads to my next tip for you, which is that baby steps are really okay. And I can't imagine a scenario where you talk to a sales leader and say, I'm going to give you much better MQLs, and they get upset with you. So if that's such an easy solution, why have us demand gen marketers not done it? It's a really high bar of accountability, because MQLs are relatively easy to game. I can throw up a webinar or do some headline marketing and have a sexy new ebook. But if I need to actually have more booked conversations with sales, there's no wiggle room to fudge that, right? So if you're trying to make these kinds of changes, you can put yourself on the line and start to make these changes. We had acknowledged at Jupiter 1 that if we did this, things were going to get worse before they got better. And thankfully, I started with a sales leader who understood that. We were raising the bar, doing things dramatically harder, but it was because we believed that the long-term bets we were going to place were going to pay off. So in April, we started our 6 Sense implementation. The idea was we wanted to layer intent data into our lead scoring model, better identify patterns, help sales prioritize the outbound they were already doing. Okay. I saw some rolling eyes. I know how we feel about 6 Sense and demand base. I've seen the LinkedIn posts of IBM doesn't work and these platforms are expensive. What a waste of time and money. So I just need to talk about this for a second. I think the disconnect in whether or not ABX platforms work comes from a misunderstanding of what they do. Because what they do is not, as what they would lead you to believe, is not read minds and tell you these 10 accounts are definitely intending to buy and they just haven't come to you yet. It's really not quite that simple. Really, this technology is doing something very basic at its core, which is, no? It's reverse IP lookup. Who can tell me some of the limitations of reverse IP lookup? Anybody? Yeah, go for it. The information's often not accurate, and people use VPNs. They're working from home. Their IP address may not indicate their company. Anyone that's used 6 Sense or Demand Base or any of these platforms knows you'll see a lot of intent, gosh, from universities. Wow, that's interesting. But and then when you layer in keyword intent data, which is reverse IP lookup from third-party sites, you get the sense of, wow, this person went and Googled CSPM. No, they didn't. They read an article that included the keyword CSPM. So it's not that 6 Sense and ABX platforms are ineffective. It's that you're expecting them to be a silver bullet, and they are not. Which leads me to the probably most important takeaway from this talk. Like, if you get this, you can nod and leave, and I'll not cry about it. Your program's way more important than your technology. If I could go back to April, like, I'm really glad we have 6 Sense. I like it. It's great. But if I could go back, I would outline the whole program before we ever got into the discussion of 6 Sense versus demand-based versus something else. Because the ABM program, the way you view intent data, the way you're going to use it in your workflow is way more important than which 6-figure tech you invest in, okay? So there's my interruption about ABM. At the same time, so we're heading into April now, we also kicked off our conversion rate optimization program. This was something that I really, as a digital marketer, should have known more about before then. But by the time we were kicking this off in April, it was all systems go on a really robust set of A/B tests. We worked with and continue to work with Spiralize. Anyone that's worked with me, a few of you are in the room, know I'm not an agency evangelist. I complain about agencies generally. I love Spiralize, cannot recommend them enough. But the core program is really simple. At any given time, we have 4 or 5 A/B tests running on our website with a queue of 2 to 3 ready to go on those same pages all the time. There's always a queue going of the tests that we've run in the past and the results, the current page and tests that are running, and the ones coming up next. And not only has this really dramatically improved our conversion rates, in a lot of ways that we never would have predicted. I never would have thought putting a form on the left side of the page would make that much of a difference. Well, that's the point of doing a more scientific program like this. But the side benefit is that CRO makes a lot of sense to non-marketers. If you talk to someone in your sales org, even HR or your security team, and you explain to them how A/B tests work, show them some examples, and show them what's coming up next, all of a sudden, you go from marketing is fluffy and they don't talk about data and they say they're data-driven, but what does that mean, to having a really practical example of what being data-driven actually means. And I think this is also a good opportunity to explain that there's art and science into CRO and marketing in general, because most of us are not going to have statistically significant levels of traffic to have like statistically significant results from an A/B test. But what you will get is a general sense of which variants are performing better, and you can go with your gut, backed by some data, commit, move on to the next test, and start to get into a pattern of doing this. And the side benefit at Jupyter One is, I know a bunch of you have seen the meme that's downstairs of the pizza that has like a rotisserie chicken and M&Ms on it. And it's like everybody's thinking what they want to add to the marketing homepage. Having a conversion rate optimization program that you talk about outside of marketing tamps down on a lot of that. Because what happens is people still bring their ideas to you, but they are thinking of them in terms of a test. And they understand that there is a queue that they need to basically, and if the results are not necessarily what they hope they are, they accept them. And so this was a side benefit of having a really formal and specific CRO program that I really did not anticipate, but to me it's almost a better reason to do it than even just the improvements in conversion rates. So by May, we had some pretty significant changes at Jupyter One, which included a new CRO, new head of RevOps, new sales leadership, and we cut our SDR team dramatically from, I think we had 12 SDRs at the time, down to 3. This was a tough season. It's been a tough year. You in the room have experienced that. But what we found, frankly, personally I feel lucky with the sales leadership that was brought in, was we were on the same page. Paul Forty, who was our then CRO, now COO, our VPs of sales, they got what we were trying to do in marketing, and they were totally on board with moving forward in an intent-based ABM model instead of send us every single email address you possibly can. So where did that leave us? By June, we gave sales access to 6 cents. We were all in on ABM, and at this point is when we stopped sharing that MQL chart, because it really didn't matter anymore. The notifications were still there, so if a marketing qualified lead from the old definition came in, sales could see it, they could work it if they wanted, but it was not our North Star KPI anymore. And this is a really simplified version of what the workflow ended up being. So we have 6 cents qualified account. I could do a whole separate presentation on how we define a qualified account. My advice to you is, whether you're going to do any form of account qualification, whether you use 6 cents or any other tool, or just do it scrappy, if you can't write on a piece of paper, this is what intent signals matter. If you had a crystal ball and you could decide how you read someone's mind. If you can't really think through what purchase intent looks like in an abstract way, you have no business trying to do it in a technical way. So that's the first thing. But qualified accounts, for us, they're either ICP or target accounts that met a threshold of activity both on our website and on external sites. The sales team gets served those up, and then they perform individual account research. If your sales team is not researching the accounts, it's not account-based anything. It's just narrowing your ICP. So this is really important. They use ChatGPT to do this, so there's really not much excuse at this point. We have easier tools than ever before. It's not 40 minutes of desk research. It's just doing a little bit of homework. The main thing that they're looking for in that process is, who are the contacts I want to reach out to? Are there any connections in our executive team to those accounts? Because we're still in startup mode. We're at that level. And what is that account's use case? Then, based on especially the use case data, they fill out their playbook in HubSpot. It's mostly a pick list. It's not anything intense, which includes indicating that account's use cases. Then that account is at the same time going through a marketing track and a sales track. The sales track is exactly what you think. They're going to reach out based on what they've learned. That's great. The marketing track is based off of the data we have on those accounts, knowing their use case, knowing what intent signals they've shown. They're in campaigns that are relevant to what they're interested in. So if their use case is incident response, that account is enrolled in a ABM campaign where the personas at that account are receiving advertising and messaging from my team that's focused on incident response, right? This is roughly what it has looked like. At the same time, we also rolled out a pretty new approach to digital advertising overall. I'm going to go through really specific examples. Some of you are probably familiar with the Cyber Defense Matrix. This is what we used to do. So each of these assets, we have the Cyber Defense Matrix book, we have the Cyber Defense Matrix conference, the on-demand content. And we also have implementing the Cyber Defense Matrix with Jupyter 1 sort of content path. What we used to do is each of these pieces of content were their own separate campaign. If you can't read it, don't worry, I'm going to read it to you. But each of these would have their own landing page, their own advertisements. Somebody would download the book, they'd get emails from us, they'd either agree to a meeting, ignore it, or, God forbid, unsubscribe. And each of these were essentially a separate avenue, which makes sense if the goal is to get as many email addresses as possible, right? You want to separately market each of the, advertise these to your target audience and try to get as many new people as possible. Versus what we do now, which all of those three assets, for example, would be part of one nurture experience altogether. So for the example of the Cyber Defense Matrix, it looks something like this. We start with the book, which is targeted to primarily CISOs in our ICP. Now, somebody they'll visit the landing page and they'll either download the book or they'll do nothing. If they do nothing, we continue to retarget them for a while with the book offer. Maybe some new creative, but it's essentially still the same offer. But let's say they download the book. I am an email marketing skeptic. Again, a topic for another time. So we do some of our lead nurture based on retargeting and advertising, where everyone that's downloaded the book then gets targeted with the next offer, which is the conference. You read the book, you liked it, great, here's some talks about the book. Similar flow there. Okay, You liked the conference, that's great. What's the next offer we could target you with? And the Cyber Defense Matrix is a nice example in our context because we're going from a very top of funnel offer. It's a book about the vendor landscape and understanding, how to use tools in the same, program overall, all the way down to we actually offer a workshop to companies to help them implement the Cyber Defense Matrix that we sponsor, and it's like a really high value but also product specific experience. So we're going in the same path from something very, very simple offer all the way down to meet with us and spend a half a day with us. But it naturally progresses people to the next stage. If we have time at the end, I'll show you the zoomed out version of this, right? This is one campaign. How do you do this across everything? I have a template for that. We'll get to it at the end. But this is a good example of what we started to do across all of our advertising. And I think it illustrates what we've all felt. It was really refreshing yesterday morning when Tom made a comment about us hating MQLs and there's like a little cheer in the room. Last year, that wasn't really the sentiment quite yet in this group of marketers. So that's interesting to me. But if MQLs are your primary goal, you're gonna do this. Of course you are. If getting someone to actually consume content, continue to learn, come back to you when they're ready to buy, if that's your goal, you're gonna do something like this. Maybe you don't do it with ads, maybe you do it with email, maybe you do a combination, but this is gonna be how you approach progressive content. So, by the end of the summer, sorry, PowerPoint. By the end of the summer, we were feeling pretty good about the changes we made. We had a nice spike here from RSA, but for the most part, it was like a pretty progressive improvement, a lot of which was CRO. And then we had a reduction in force that affected most of the marketing team and a lot of the sales team. So, okay, so why is this section called the Stockdale Paradox? Does anyone know what the Stockdale Paradox is? Well, Kevin, you were there. The Stockdale Paradox is this idea that you have to both keep the faith that you will prevail in the end and also face the brutal reality of the facts. Face the facts, the brutal reality, rather. So, what were the brutal facts? In our case, yes, we had really strong leading indicators, which we were and still are very proud of, especially on the marketing side. But the macro environment this year has been a tough one. And there's really no escaping that, especially if you're in an emerging category, which Jupiter One is. And so the feeling was, the best thing we could do was be extra conservative on runway and invest really heavily in product and R&D. So where did that leave us by September? We were really focused at this point on regrouping, refocusing, and thinking, okay, we have signal that this way of doing things is working. How on earth do we maintain it with a drastically reduced team? So where are we now? We still have really good alignment across the go-to-market team. I have said this to many of you in the room through the conference. This is the most aligned I've ever been with a sales team. It's such an honor and a privilege, genuinely. We don't get into any of those, is it a marketing deal, is it a sales deal? In fact, the model we used for attribution came from my head of RevOps, where he was the one that told me, I don't want to get into attribution wars about where things come from. Amazing. We also have a really solid and continually improving demand capture motion. We are exceptionally good at converting accounts that are already in market for asset management, CASM. We are better and better at this every day, but genuinely, if they are showing up on the fish finder, so to speak, we can get them. We're set up for demand gen, but it's moving at definitely a slower pace. We talked about on a few different sessions this week how demand gen and brand requires huge amounts of investment to do, especially on the content side. And so we're setting up the lean version of that for next year. Maybe that'll be next year's talk. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. We met our Q3 and we're on track for Q4. That's good. And we have really exciting plans for 2024. So to sum it up, You really can't do this without executive alignment. Your program is way, way, way more important than your tech. And finally, because everyone asked us this, like Rebecca, if she were here, would laugh, because we constantly be like, well, when are we gonna see the results? And how long is it gonna take? And people were telling us 9 months, 12 months, 18 months. It takes a year or more. I think this is like a really realistic timeline. It takes like 3 months to convince people internally that you want to do things differently and how you're going to do them. It takes another 3 months to just do the campaign planning and the ops and what are you going to do, and oh my gosh, what's the creative going to be? And then on top of just that prep period, then it's whatever your sales cycle is at minimum, right? So this is a long-term play. I want to also pause and thank all of these lovely humans. Some of them are still at Jupiter One, some of them moved on, some of them were internal to the team, some of them are agency folks, but demand gen is a team sport. I really dislike the way we talk about demand generation as if it's, I don't know, synonymous with digital marketing. My title is demand gen and digital marketing, so there you go. Demand gen's a go-to-market strategy, and product marketing can run in a demand gen fashion, and communications can run to a demand gen strategy. Sales should be running in a demand gen strategy all on its own. It really takes everybody being aligned. I have a few resources to share with you, but we'll get to them if we have time. We'll stop here, and I'd love to take questions if you've got them. Questions or comments, existential crises, that's fine. Yeah. Yeah, go for it, Kevin.
One, thank you. You're a rock star. Love working with you.
Thank you.
If you can't afford something like 6 cents or demand-based, are there other options to start this?
Yeah. So I think a really scrappy version is, I use this at a company called Lineup, is a tool called Candy. It's spelled C-A-N-D-D-I. I can't remember if there's 2 D's or 2 I's, but something like that. It's just reverse IP lookup with some form cookies. So it's really simple. It's going to require you to determine what the predictive part of it looks like, and it is much more manual, but it's only like $200 a month. And my view is if your sales team doesn't want to do something with that, they may not be ready for a 6-figure investment on intent data. So it's a good way to pilot things, or if you're like really early startup and you just simply don't have the budget, you could start there. Yeah.
You said your new advertising focus is content consumption. Can you talk a little bit about what kind? Is it like product focus, educational?
Yeah, okay, let's jump ahead a little bit to answer that question. So it's almost Christmas, some presents. This is my master spreadsheet crazy of planning content and where it goes. That will take you to a template version. I know you can't read it because it's small. We're going to talk about it. Because the answer is it depends. One of the things I really like 6 Cents for is when we say, this is an awareness campaign. You could literally just pull a list of accounts that are in an awareness stage, and it kind of does some of the homework for you, which is a nice shortcut. And it moves accounts through their stages like pretty naturally. So, this is boring buyer's journey stuff that we talk about, but the way that I've structured this is in defining what those stages are. So for example, for us, if we're moving target accounts into an awareness stage, it's when they recognize that there is a problem, but they're not really searching for a solution yet. We define what the audience is. The goal would be, we just want them to visit a Jupiter One page. So that's all the top of funnel stuff. That's the books, and it's the conference swag, and it's all the fun stuff just to see our logo and know we exist. Where the next stage, there's a different goal. The goal is then to become a known contact. Give me your email. The point of that is not because it's an MQL, I'm going to send it to sales. It's just to see that they're interested enough in our content that they're going to come back and stick around. Whereas the next stage would then be getting in touch with us specifically, and then finally, like, you're just keeping them warm while they're already in the pipeline. So what kinds of content depends really dramatically on like where you are in this map and what you're trying to do. I think one of the things that's really nice about getting the buy-in from executives to like move marketing this direction is we talk about top line numbers, like the number of target accounts we're engaging, how many of them have known contacts, number of demo requests. Those are the kinds of things I report on. But when we talk about whether or not a campaign was successful, it depends on the campaign. Because some of them, the point is to get people to read the content. So maybe the goal is time on page or engagement rate. Whereas other campaigns, the goal is fill out the form. And so it doesn't make sense to loop them all under one bucket and have one goal. Depending on the content, the goal may shift, and I think that that's appropriate. Yeah, I'm going to leave it there for now. What else? Go for it.
You said you're great at demand capture.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain why that is? Is that a product thing, a sales thing? Just how do you get great at demand capture? Like converting those who are in market?
Yeah, so it's a few things. One is literally our conversion rates are way better, like 4 to 10x better, depending on the page. The second is we have done a lot of work throughout JupyterOne as an org this year to better define our ICP and our use cases, like it's product marketing, okay? Understanding who even is in market really useful for even. And the third thing that I think has helped a lot is the sales team has really changed the way they do prospecting. It's not like throw spaghetti at the wall and just eventually something will convert. Like they are really thoughtful about which companies, who they talk to, how they tailor the messages, and they use 6 Sense data to prioritize who to go after first, which makes it a lot easier for them because instead of going after everybody, they're focusing on where there is some signal. Again, it's not a silver bullet. If it was a silver bullet, then they would just request a demo. But a really good example of this is we had a massive account that was showing up in some of our early intent signal stages in 6 Sense. And so the sales team came to us in one of our weekly ABM meetings and they said, okay, we want to add this to our target accounts. It's like a little bit on the edge of our ICP, but they're engaging with our stuff. We want to do that. So we did. We added them to some more campaigns. The sales team also did some more aggressive outreach to this account. Next week, my VP came to me and said, I can see they're opening my emails. I can see they're clicking on my emails. I can see they're on the page. They're not talking to me. They're not responding to my emails. It's like, well, that's good. Like, just let it be. Keep going. We continue to target them. They continue to reach out. 2 weeks later, they requested a. And this is like a pretty common scenario now. And it leads to understanding there's some marketing, there's some sales. We all work together on the same accounts, which is really good. But it's also, educating your sales team that that's a win for everybody. It doesn't matter that they didn't reply to the email because I'm not going to say to that sales executive, well, it's a marketing deal because they requested a demo. No, we all participated in that one. And so I think we've gotten a lot better at just being really focused, going really aggressively after the accounts that are, swimming in our pond, so to speak. How do we celebrate our successes? What a great question. Well, I'm here. That's great. One of the things that is really great about JupyterOne, and by the way, we're hiring a director of product marketing, so if you like this approach, come talk to me, is everyone that comes through the JupyterOne team will say, like, no matter what the macro environment looks like or how things are going, like, we have a really solid culture and team. And thankfully, we have people outside of marketing who recognize what marketing does. So I don't have to show up to an all-hands meeting and be like, we did so great. They do that already, which is great. And not every org can boast that, but it's awesome when you don't have to be the one celebrating your successes because they're recognized. And that really only happens when all of go-to-market is bought in and pulling in the same direction, frankly. Yes?
Yeah, so first of all, I am so jealous of your connection between sales and marketing team. So from a culture perspective, like leading back into what you just commented on, is it from the CEO side that's really driving that, shift in how other stakeholders view marketing, and it's not a constant battle of trying to prove yourself, or how is that promoted within the company?
So the question is, how is that promoted through the company? Is it being driven by the CEO? It is definitely supported by the CEO. It's largely been driven through our COO, who was the CRO, Paul Forty, and through Rebecca Sanda, who had been our VP of Marketing. She's now moved on to Google Cloud. We miss her every day. But it was really the two of them showing what it looks like for the marketing and sales leaders to be on the same page. One of the things, and I share this only because I had it in my abstract, but this also was a part of it. So after last year's conference, where there was still quite a bit of debate amongst this peer group of do we do MQLs in the funnel? Do we do all demand gen? Do we combine them and have a mixed funnel? I started kind of gathering my thoughts around how I would want to do demand gen differently in a way that didn't require a huge, tens of millions of dollars marketing budget to just fully run brand, because that's just not the situation that I've been in. And this is by no means best practice. It is not even complete sentences in most places. But it did have the benefit of when I would talk to our CEO or our head of people or even Rebecca or Paul, I kind of had a walking deck of this is what I want to do. Are we in the right direction or not? So I'm not necessarily prescribing that this is a great way to do it, but I do think having something, again, it's the perception of I have thought about it, whether the actual points are super convincing or not, we can debate. Was a really useful place to start.
I really like what you said about understanding the intent signals and knowing what those are. So can you give us some examples of some intent signals that you recommend looking for?
Yeah.
Maybe some insight into how you came to realize that those were the right intent signals.
We are still refining it, okay? So in 6 Sense, it's going to show you there's more, but more or less 2 types of intent signals. The first are the ones that come from your website, which I think are the easiest to kind of wrap your head around. Oh, somebody visited my pricing page. They want to know how much it costs. That's a signal that they're interested. That's a really easy one. Or maybe they're visiting a specific use case page, right? Your own territory, it's easier to interpret. Where things get tricky, specifically with 6 Sense, I believe demand-based is similar, is this concept of keyword-based intent. Basically, for those of you who have never used this, you put in a list of keywords that you're interested in. They could be brand keywords like Jupiter One or our competitor names or something else. And you can put in generic keywords, which might be Chasm, asset management, asset visibility, whatever are interesting things to you. And basically what 6 Sense is doing through the network of websites that they're partnered with is if there's a page that mentions that keyword and an account visits it, it's reverse IP lookup on a third-party site, and it's adding that signal. Then it's layering all of that with a predictive model. And the predictive model is based off of what's been in your CRM and marketing automation up until that point. So if you're in the case of Jupiter One, making changes to your ICP, changes to how you do things, you're going to have to keep updating that model, which, again, I don't think is a problem. You just have to know that that's what you've signed up for. If you think, and now I've set it up and 6 Sense tells me where to go and everything's, you will be disappointed. I am the 6 Sense admin, have been since the beginning. It is like a big project to implement, to update, to re-educate, to explain. One of the things I tell our sellers a lot is it's looking at keywords consumed, not keywords searched, because that's the other thing. It would be so cool, and creepy, but it would be so cool if we knew Joe at Cisco Googled CSPM. Amazing, he's looking for this thing. That's not what it's saying. So one thing we saw, we partner a bit with Wiz, for example. Wiz was one of the branded keywords that we had, and we get alerts on Wiz constantly. Wiz has a lot of content and a lot of PR. So anyone in security could show up for being interested in Wiz. So the keyword strategy of what matters is a really tricky thing to keep refining, because if you go too specific, the third-party content doesn't exist, and you will get nothing. And if you go too broad, your sellers will quickly get confused at what they're looking at and whether or not it's useful to them. Maybe next year I'll have a more precise answer, but cool.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you're looking at
Okay, the question is, if you're looking at a new organization, how can you tell if sales and marketing are aligned? Oh, what a loaded question. Okay. This is where things become, in all of interviewing, you know, when you're looking for a new position, you're interviewing the company as much as they're interviewing you. And things become both an art and a science. So how you tell, I think, is somewhat up to your gut. But the questions I would ask is, what are your expectations of marketing? How often do you meet? What do you talk about in those meetings? Oh, you're interested in ABM? Like, what does that look like to you? A lot of sales leaders will go, I want to do ABM and 6 cents is cool and I want it, but they don't realize if you want to run an ABM play, I'm going to give you homework. I make my sellers research individual accounts. There's no way in hell they would do it if their leadership didn't, you know, also believe in it and make them do it. So like asking those questions really practically. And again, like I said in the beginning, I believe in disclosing bias, like let people filter what you say through, you know, what they know you believe. And so I think if you say, this is the type of marketer I am and these are the kinds of things, the kinds of programs I want to run and the way I want to work, they will filter you in or out based on that. So Godspeed. Okay. Great. Well, we're just about at time. Thank you so much. This has been quite the journey, quite the year. For those of you who have had a similarly interesting 2023, we're nearly there, folks. Thanks so much.